Well, the Epstein files were released, quote unquote, released to a group of social media influencers. But what was in these files? Pretty much nothing. As independent journalist, documentary filmmaker, and Breaking Points contributor James Lee reported on, many of the documents are already online, and worse, many that were redacted are actually versions of unredacted ones we already have access to.
Here's a screenshot from a page in that binder. A lot of the information has been redacted. Here's that same page of names, already online, unredacted. Here they are side by side. Redacted, unredacted. This is what was in the binder. This is what was already available online. So today we kind of went backwards. Not ideal for the administration, to say the least, that was probably hoping to use this issue to prove how transparent they are.
Are you a yo-yo dieter? You diet, you lose weight, but then you gain it all back plus a few extra pounds. Then later you lose it and regain it again and again. This is dangerous. Studies show yo-yo dieting can increase your risk of heart attack, stroke, type 2 diabetes, and other health problems. So breaking free of your yo-yo diet pattern is a main reason doctors created Lean. Lean is a supplement. It's not an injection. You don't need a prescription. The science behind Lean is impressive. It contains natural ingredients that target weight loss in 3 powerful ways. Lean helps maintain healthy blood sugar. Lean helps control appetite and cravings. And Lean helps burn fat by converting fat into energy. So if you're tired of losing weight and gaining it back, if you want to lose meaningful weight at a healthy pace, then Lean was created for you. Now, let me get you started with 20% off when you enter Kim20 at takelean.com. That's code Kim20 at takelean.com. James Lee, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here. I feel like I just got scammed by these Epstein files. I mean, what in the hell is this?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, first of all. So what this was, I think, just based on my speculation and seeing some of the things that's transpired, is that this was at best very much a bungled attempt at showing the American people that this administration is one of transparency. And I think at worst, potentially the interpretation could be that, you know, there will never be any kind of release of new files or the list, quote unquote. Does it
Right.
exist? Does it not exist? Was this an attempt to kind of just appease the American people and say, hey, here you go, this is it? Not knowing kind of the savviness of now the online independent media community to say, wait, hold on a second, we've already seen these files before. And like you pointed out, or in my clip there, in a unredacted version of
Right.
it.
Which is even crazier. And then what happens is all of these social media influencers that were given these binders, they come out with these statements, and all of the statements say the same thing. Well, they all have the same line in it, which is, this is the most transparent administration in American history. And you can see here, there's DC Drano saying the same thing. This is the most transparent administration in American history. Then Jack Posobiec saying same thing. Then Chad Prather saying it. I mean, all of them are saying it. And I mean, so you know what
Yeah.
this is like one of those concerns. I mean, what is the difference between this and mainstream media? I mean, this is what we were trying to get away from, right? Mainstream media having all of the exact same talking points, saying the exact same thing, talking in one concerted voice. And I don't understand the difference when all of these supposed independent, influencers or independent, some of them have shows or whatever, they come out and they all say this is the most transparent in history. And even worse, a couple of them actually said the exact same thing. There was like DC Drano and Chad Prather. When we look at this whole thing here, their statements are identical. They're literally identical word for word. Their statement was obviously copied and pasted. And then Chad came out and said, oh, that's because I copy and pasted from DC Drano. I just thought it was a good one. So, he's trying to like cover. But then other people pointed out and they're like, wait a minute, but how's that possible? Because you actually posted yours like earlier than he posted his or something. So, according to the timestamp. But let's first, I mean, we'll talk about the sham, but with the independent media people and what they're doing. But let's talk about the actual files that were released first in these binders. There was nothing in this that we already hadn't seen, as you pointed out in your segment.
Yeah, so from my understanding of it, it includes a lot of the stuff that was already released based on the Ghislaine Maxwell trial in the Southern District of New York. All those documents, and then there was a few additional documents that was released or declassified by the FBI that's also available online at the FBI vault. But there were no documents of any significance. There was no smoking gun. There was no bombshell. Because I think the biggest miss here probably was the way they teed it up, right? You had Pam Bondi going on and doing kind of a media tour on Fox News and other news outlets, going, "Hey, I have the Epstein files on my desk. We're going to release them." And it's unclear at this point whether she thought she had something different than what she had on her desk,
Right.
or did she know this all along and was hoping to use this as kind of a PR stunt? That I am not sure of. There's a bunch of speculation online, and I think there's people kind of clawing at each other online, as you could see, where some people think that, hey, this is she's acting in good faith versus, oh, she's,
Mhm.
obviously compromised. I'm going to withhold judgment there until more comes out, and because I from a, it did say on the binder, phase one, right? So
Right.
presumably there are other phases of documents that we're going to see going forward, and so we'll have to see how that plays out. And there's also infighting now within, you know Pam Bondi's group, as well as the FBI, saying that there's some rogue agents out there that is
Yeah.
withholding thousands of files. So it's unclear who's at fault here. The deep state, you can say that they're acting,
I just don't think
in a
they wanna
way.
release these files at all. I don't think I think they just I mean, clearly what's happened is they've given us something we've already had, and as you pointed out, they gave us less actually because they redacted stuff that didn't need to be redacted because it was already circulating on the internet, and we've had it for years from various lawsuits or various leaks. We've had the flight logs, we've had a lot of these names. I mean, this stuff is out there, and you can search for it, and it's accessible. And your clip, you actually gave people, and I have the link to your clip down below, and you actually gave people the links of where they could go and find this
Yeah.
stuff without it being redacted. I mean, this is what's so stupid about this, but it just feels like, look, the administration said we're going to be the most transparent in American history. We're going to give you these Epstein files, but they're not really wanting to give us these files because I think they and many of us believe that they point to a Mossad operation that was used to try to blackmail powerful people and politicians in this country, and they don't really want that information out there. So it's just this kind of, yeah, we'll give you these crumbs to make you happy. These influencers are holding up the binders. And and then now that the American people are pissed, right? Because for one, why did they release it to just some social media influencers? Why not put it all online? Why not have a link and every single one of us could go to to the site and read the documents ourselves? Why do this kind of dog and pony show where you give it to these different influencers? And the other issue with the influencers is they were all like pro-Israel Zionist influencers from my viewpoint. I mean, I didn't really see any that were, none of them have been critical of Israel, actually, and calling this out as a Mossad operation. Cernovich had been the most vocal, the most, he's been doing the most digging on the Epstein files, but I don't think he's ever called it a Mossad op. I mean, I could be wrong on that. Do you know, has he ever called it that, or does he just call it a pedo ring that he wants to crack down on?
Not to my understanding, because yeah, that's the issue with this whole Epstein thing, is that there's two main things. That one that's been focused on by the mainstream media is this more, hey, it's this child sex trafficking ring. There are people doing things on the island, orgies, and all this kind of stuff that's very sensationalized, that points to bad behavior. But then there's this whole other side that says, okay, well, who were the people behind Epstein? It's clear that he wasn't acting
Right,
alone. Who or what organization were funding him, and to what end? What were they trying to do there? And that, I think is a question that a lot of the mainstream media do not want to touch. A lot of the alternative media do not want to touch, for obvious reasons, because it, from the digging that I've done, it points towards a certain country in the Middle East, right? The deputy FBI director, Dan Bongino, in a
right,
clip that was circulating earlier this week, was saying, hey, he believes that it's a part of he's an intelligence asset, but he doesn't know which country it's a country from the Middle East, but he doesn't know which one. And for me, it's hard to believe, Epstein was working for Iran. There's zero evidence that is the case. And if that was the case, I'm sure this already would have been litigated in the
yeah,
public sphere. So the main issue here is, a lot of it points towards Israel, and now the big problem there is not only are going to, famous people, powerful people, billionaires, and those type of folks going to be facing, criminal trial. The other side of it is now, as a country, we have to reassess our foreign policy in the Middle East to say, hey, is our greatest ally truly our greatest ally? What is
Yeah, when
what
they're
is going on here?
blackmailing our people and strong arming us into positions by with a lot of blackmail. So I do want to show this. This is Pam Bondi, because then now when everybody's mad, right? Because this is like such a stupid thing, the way that they did it. Just give it to everybody, but instead they gave it to select influencers, and which really reminded me a lot of the October 7th footage that came out. When Israel was like, we've compiled all the footage that proves that Hamas did this horrible thing on October 7th, which is true. We know that the attack happened, but they were making a lot of false claims about beheaded babies, babies in ovens, women being raped, and there were all of these claims that were made, and there was no evidence of those claims. So what they did was they put together a movie, and they showed it only to certain people, and they brought only those certain people into the room to show them that movie. And then all of those people came out, and it was like they were also handed the same line to say, where they all came out and said, oh my God, what I saw was like the worst. And they all basically claimed that they saw things they did not see in this film in regards to the beheaded babies and the rapes and all of these things that they just didn't even see. But Israel could trust that these people they hand selected would tout the narrative that they told them to tout, like to come out there and say this. And so this really feels really similar to that. Like Mossad was in charge of that operation, and now Mossad is in charge of this release. And they're like, okay, let's hand select a few influencers that are going to come through, read the documents and say, wow, this was just a giant pedo ring, like nothing else to see here. Bad people are going down now because of the pedo ring, but without any implication whatsoever to Mossad, to Israel, to the blackmail ring that they put onto our politicians and powerful people, like no mention of that whatsoever. And so it feels really, really similar to that. So I think a lot of us are mad about it. We're like, what the hell? And then now the administration's like, oh, well, what are we going to do? And what's crazy is what you pointed out, the infighting. So now they're pointing at each other. And I mean, we're going to see this. You've got Pam Bondi, the attorney general, who all of these people that loved, that voted for Trump were touting for, saying, all right, we're finally going to get justice. She's not releasing the files. Who does she blame? She blames the FBI. Kash Patel. She blames Kash Patel on the FBI, essentially. So she says, Dear Director Patel, before you came into office, I requested the full and complete files related to Jeffrey Epstein. In response to this request, I received approximately 200 pages of documents, which consisted primarily of flight logs, Epstein's list of contacts, and a list of victims' names and phone numbers. I repeatedly questioned whether this was the full set of documents responsive to my request, and was repeatedly assured by the FBI that we had received the full set of documents. Late yesterday, I learned from a source that the FBI field office in New York was in possession of thousands of pages of documents related to the investigation and indictment of Epstein. Despite my repeated requests, the FBI never disclosed the existence of these files. When you and I spoke yesterday, you were just as surprised as I was to learn this new information. So they're blaming it on these rogue FBI. So first it's kind of like, well, this is the FBI's fault, right? The attorney general saying this is the FBI's fault. But then she's like, but we can't blame Kash Patel because no one's going to believe that. So we're going to have to make it rogue agents inside of the FBI are the ones that are withholding the information. Or maybe none of you really want to give up these files and you're just going to do the finger blame game so that you can get away with this. In fact, let me play this. This is a Dan Bongino clip of him talking about his passions, his pet projects.
What cause is dear to your heart?
Cause is dear to my Israel, defense of Israel.
What is number one?
Oh, Israel, defense of Israel. That's my number. And who's this guy now? Dan Bongino, big named podcaster turned FBI deputy. What's his exact role now in the FBI?
I believe he's the deputy director.
So he's right underneath Kash Patel. So this is who we now have at the head of the FBI, and his pet passion project is Israel. Are you kidding me? Like, are we believing any of this bullshit?
Well, so I think this is going to present itself as a challenge to the American public, the way this is going to continue to play out, because it's clear to almost everybody, or it should be clear to everybody, that this administration has been bought off by Israel, right? The $100 million from Mary Adelson is not just for shits and giggles. It is
right
for a particular for a particular purpose. And we're starting to see that. So everybody who is tight and close with the White House, whether they be official personnel or these influencers that you speak of or that we saw that were at the White House, they're all very heavily hardcore pro-Zionist people. And that's kind of seems like kind of a requirement to be in this administration. But here's what I kind of see. It could go few different ways because I believe that the American public is not going to like the fact that there is another foreign government that is seemingly infiltrating a lot of various sectors of our government, whether it be in the executive branch, the Congress with the APAC funding, or within this kind of deep state, Dan Bongino, now deputy director of the FBI. I don't think that's going to play very well. So I'm starting to see actually, especially, in the MAGA sphere, this push of kind of message where the America First message is going to be lumped in with this Israel message. I've already seen hashtags being shared now that said, America First, Israel Forever. So it's not actually, they're going to try to argue that it's not actually against American interests to be a Zionist. It's actually, we're actually the ones that are puppeteering them versus the other way around. I'm starting to see that kind of infiltrate in some of the messages kind of in a subliminal way or in a very overt way. And I think
Yeah.
that's kind of what we're looking at in the future. And the one thing I'll say about the whole influencer White House event is, from my understanding, it wasn't necessarily supposed to be like an Epstein file release event. It was, I guess, a pre-planned event where these influencers were invited to show a gesture from the Trump administration to say, hey, we are now also going to be building relationships with alternative media. And it just so happened it kind of coincided with this Epstein file release thing and Pam Bondi getting on her desk and saying, oh, okay, maybe we can kind of shoehorn this in together. And there were reports saying that she actually didn't want that photo op. I'm not really sure what went on there exactly, because there are also other people saying that no, she did want that photo op. So it's
Yeah.
really hard to say exactly what is the truth of what
Mhm.
happened. And certainly these guys, I mean, one of the things that I've seen discussed online is that access is kind of a very powerful drug, right? It's clear that these people were very excited to be invited to the White House because they're all, like I said, they're all used to be outsiders looking in, and now
Yeah.
they're on the inside, and that feels really good for people, especially ones that you want to put yourself on the internet. I presume you want a bigger and bigger voice. You want more influence. This is definitely it. So this is kind of this is kind of hard to navigate, I think, for independent media folks is to say, okay, how do I want to stay independent, or do I want to kind of cozy up to power because that also has its benefits? So that's kind of, I think everybody has to kind of decide that for themselves.
I mean, they're just becoming the new establishment media. I mean, that especially with putting out the same messages, and clearly they were told to say, "This is the most transparent administration in American history," because they all said that exact same line. So clearly they were given a directive and they complied with that directive. And like you said, it's because they don't want to not have the access that they have. And that's how the establishment media became the establishment media. That was literally what happened. They all, I mean, it's like an incestual pool in Washington, D.C. Everybody knows each other. Everybody hangs out together. They party together. They marry each other. I mean, and they want to keep that access. I mean, one person who I don't agree with on a lot of things, but Laura Loomer, she actually has been calling this out, like this
Yeah.
whole charade out, and but she's lost her access, right? I mean, she's not being invited to anything, and she's kind of been shunned by the administration. And because of that, she's retained her ability to criticize. Now, some people are saying, well, she's only criticizing because she wasn't invited to the party. And maybe that's true, but at least it's forcing, not being invited to the party will cause you maybe to actually look at things a little bit more critically. So she's at least, and she's a big Zionist, but she's still calling out this release and say we're not getting the whole story. Um, but I mean, this is
Yeah.
just, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the one comment to go back to your point about independent media, and that's the biggest struggle. And we see this on both sides, right? Now you're seeing this word transparent pop up over and over. With the Kamala, during the campaign, right? If you remember, there was the word joy that popped up over and over. So clearly,
Right.
this is this is a directive that's coming from the top down. as far as the messaging goes. And one thing that, because I actually just recently did a piece on quote unquote independent media not being independent. And one of the observations that I made and that what people talked about is that regular folks don't seem to really understand the difference between independent media and mainstream media, in that the reporting is really what matters. I think what people have lost faith in is maybe some of the brands like CNN, MSNBC,
Yeah,
but as long as it's another face talking about the same things, they don't seem to make that connection, right? So you have people, let's say on TikTok, and that's kind of a lot of the world where I come from, people just reading mainstream headlines from CNN or CBS or ABC News, and people think it's like fantastic reporting. It's like, oh my God, this is so good, and you're telling us the truth. And I kind of had to go and did a piece and say, hey, by the way, this guy is just reading the same
right.
news that you quote unquote hate. And so this is the big, this will be a big loss if, we don't effectively communicate to the public that it's the reporting and the independence of the reporting that really matters. Because we all know, mainstream media is mainstream media. The better name to call mainstream media is really corporate media, right? It's using
Hmm.
it's who's funding the news is a lot more important and dictates what gets covered, what doesn't get covered, right? And so in this situation, if we tie it back to Epstein, why was it so difficult to cover in the first place, even with the child sex trafficking ring? Well, because there are a lot of financial interests involved that they didn't want to break, right? There are multiple people trying to break that story, and multiple news organizations shut that down in the very beginning.
Yeah,
But then now that broke out, and now the next thing that we're kind of pushing for is like, okay, are there are there other things going on behind the scenes? Like we talked about the intelligence asset angle that we are so far not allowed to talk about. And this, I think, this is the power of independent media. It's us, and including myself in that that push the narrative to say, hey, no, you guys need to talk about this because it's important. It's important for the safety of this nation. It's also important in terms of being responsible to the citizens of the U.S. to learn the truth about what's really going on here.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So we'll see if do we have any word on part two, I guess, of phase two of these drops.
Well, phase 2 was supposed to be today, right? Because based
That's what
on
I
with
thought.
the some of the statements yesterday, but today has, come and gone. So I
Yeah,
don't know if we're gonna get anything. And really what's important is 'cause, one of the things to think about, in terms of setting expectations to the public is what exactly are we looking for in phase 2 or 3 or 4, right? Because a lot we have the flight logs, we have all these lists, like, we pretty much know who is involved, but the hard part here is that next step to say, okay, just because you were on the island or you were on the plane, that doesn't mean you're guilty of a crime. But what we
right,
do know is that Epstein basically bugged his entire house with cameras and recording devices all over the place. So it's like, where are those things right now? Where are those tapes that supposedly the FBI has of recordings? Because that's really the smoking gun is say, oh, do we have a tape of Bill Clinton doing things with underage, women? That is what we need. We already know that he was there. He was on the plane. He was on the plane like 75 times. We already know all that.
right.
That's really the piece that we're looking for. And then the other side and the intelligence side, it's okay, we need to track the money, right? That's the investigation that needs to happen. Is like, okay, who was giving money to Jeffrey Epstein to fund all these things? Like, how did he come up with the $9 million to give to Harvard to become some kind of, guest scholar or whatever it was? And then linking that to potential intelligence assets and that investigation. I'm not sure how far that if that's ever been done, but that's
Yeah.
kind of what we're looking for in terms of I think from the public standpoint is those two aspects, is making sure that people who were doing heinous crimes actually face justice. And the other side is, hey, is our government compromised? And if it is, we should know about it and do something about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is really, I mean, of course, we want justice for the victims, but I think that there's the whole of American public have been victimized by this. If this does in fact turn out to be a Mossad operation, I just don't think that the FBI has any of that. I don't. I mean, why would Mossad let them have that? I mean, if you were running an intel operation and trying to blackmail the American government, you're not going to let the American government hold that blackmail in files that can be then used against you. I mean, you would take it immediately and store it in your own, your own facilities. So obviously, I don't think that there would be none of that to be found anyway. Um, because it's too valuable to Mossad to be using, to Israel to be using. So the only thing that we could get is, like what you said, this investigation into who was funding. Should we need investigation into the bad actors? But again, they're not going to face crimes. They're not, if they're still valuable to be used for political gain, they're not going to face any charges because the blackmail is too valuable. And so they're going to keep protecting them. So it would just be these kind of low-level players that don't matter anymore, or maybe they're already dead, and then we could just kind of go after them posthumously, right? Like Bill Richardson, the former governor of New Mexico. They'd be like, "Oh, that's who we're gonna." I think it was right. He's dead, I think. So that's they would be like, "Oh, that's the guy," or "Yeah, we're gonna go after Jean-Luc Brenal, who's dead, and we're gonna go after all these dead people because that doesn't matter." But tracing the money and then just showing, I just don't think we're ever going to get the definitive aha. Israel did it after all. They blackmailed us. But it's just highly suspected. And that high level of suspicion maybe would be enough just to make the American populace say, we got to really rethink this friendship, this supposed friendship we've got. What kind of a friend blackmails you like this?
Right. And that should be evidence in and of itself to say that this whole narrative that we're spinning, that America is actually in control of Israel, is not true. Because if it was that, if that was the case, we would be having the tapes of Netanyahu. Like we would be the ones that were blackmailing them with
Right.
our, intelligence assets versus the other way around, where you hear of all these stories of how Israel has not only in the United States, but the Prime Minister of Great Britain, all these things that they've done in the past to basically keep people in check. And so it's hard to say, like, this is part of the narrative that actually is good. If the Trump administration wants to spin this in a positive way, is that there is just a blackmail operation of this size that is taking place for this long is certainly going to have a lot of people within that mechanism to check that, to make sure that we don't get access to all of these important files. So this,
Yeah.
this bungled event is just a sign of the deep state, quote unquote, pushing back and saying, no, we're not going to let you have all this information so easily. I think that's one way to spin it. Of course, the other way to spin it probably would say, well, maybe Pam Bondi is also involved. I mean, she was literally the Florida Attorney General during the time that Jeffrey Epstein was committing all of these crimes in her state. So presumably she would know something about this situation, and would have done something about it, a decade ago. So that's the other side. I think we're going to have to really let this play out. You can either view this as kind of like in a pessimistic way. I've been talking to some of my friends about it. It's like, we either can talk about it in a pessimistic way where it's like, oh, everything is screwed up and this administration is never going to do anything, or we can say, hey, let's be optimistic. Let's make sure we push them, but in a way where it's like, hey, you need to do this for the American people. And we've seen statements like from Kash Patel saying, hey, we're going to be transparent. There's going to be no cover-ups. Pam Bondi is saying the same thing. So we at least have them on record saying, hey, we're going to take a different direction. Now it's like, okay, so you gave us your word. Now let's see if you can keep your word. And that's, this early in the administration, I'm kind of choosing that path, and we'll have to kind of see how things play out in, phase two. I think phase two will be very indicative of where this is going to go.
Well, let's find out. I'm tending towards the pessimistic, but I like the idea of maybe staying positive and let's just see, let's wait and see. But I already saw this and I didn't like it, so I don't know if I'm gonna like the rest of it. All right,
This was not
James
good.
Lee, thank you so much. Independent journalist, documentary filmmaker, and Breaking Points contributor. James, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Kim, for having me on. Appreciate it.